Hello and welcome to the Spokane .NET Users Group. Tonight's meeting is sponsored by IntelliTect, and I am Erin Wissing. I will be your moderator today. We appreciate you coming out. And without further ado, I have Kevin Bost. He is a senior software architect at IntelliTect and also a Microsoft MVP. He's going to be introducing our speakers to you tonight. Kevin? Thank you very much, Erin. Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This is going to be a really great talk. Both Mark and Grant I've worked with for many years now, and they are both excellent speakers. Mark, for those people who may not be familiar with him, he's the CEO at IntelliTech. He's a Microsoft Regional Director in addition to a Microsoft MVP. He's the author of the Essential C# book series. So he usually knows what's going on with .NET. Grant is the Senior Technical Officer at IntelliTech. I remember my first conversation with Grant just happened to be over the phone one day as I was getting ready to catch a plane. Haven't done that much recently. But just the quick introduction, and what's always caught me is the way he's able to clearly explain and articulate anything that is technical in nature and be able to get everybody at the table onto the same page and kind of dive home at whatever the underlying issue and questions are. So without further ado, you're not here to listen to me. I will let those guys take it away. Thanks, Kevin. Mark, Grant.
Welcome. It's good to have you guys.
Yeah.
So today we're going to start covering .NET 5. So it came out just recently. We had a release back in November, and we're going to talk about all the things that are included in .NET and what's involved with that. So to start, my name is Michaelis. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a regional director, and I work here at IntelliTect. And this is Grant. Grant, why don't you choose yourself?
I'm Grant Erickson. I am not a lot. I've been coding for a long time. I can say I've been coding since about 1980. So I jumped on the bandwagon early.
Fine. So quickly, just to give you a rundown on .NET 5. Essentially what's happened over the years, we've started with sort of .NET Framework, or was then called just .NET, and I went through a bunch of versions all the way up to about 4.8. And then in about 4.7, Microsoft split that source code. They literally made a copy of all the code and created a new repo called .NET Core. And they started from scratch to go develop a new version of .NET that ran cross-platform, that ran both on Linux and on Windows and on Mac. And in doing that, they essentially had to strip a whole bunch of stuff out of .NET Framework, what was then .NET, so .NET Framework, and allow it to sort of have the minimum that it needed for the next version. And that specifically was focused on doing ASP.NET development, as well as doing command line type things. And to avoid confusion, they renamed what was then .NET to be .NET Framework. It now became .NET Framework 4. Whatever the number was. And then they continued with .NET 1.0, and then .NET 2.0 and .NET 3.0. And then eventually they became a problem. Sort of Microsoft was maintaining multiple frameworks, and so they had to go and maintain what was going on with .NET Framework. They had to maintain what was going on with .NET Core. We can sort of see the history here in a rough outline, or if you look at it more finely, you can see the history over time. There were a whole bunch of frameworks here. Starting a Zoom program, so we can go ahead and see that they had Rotor. Microsoft actually had an open source version of .NET called Rotor that you could start working with. And over time, when .NET Framework started back over here, the problem came that they now had to maintain multiple versions of the source code. And then the Mono team was also maintaining multiple versions of the source code for the Mono version of .NET. And to deal with that, Microsoft decided to merge them and drop the .NET Core, stop development of .NET Framework, get as much of .NET Framework they could into .NET Core, and then name it .NET 5 and drop the core name, the core moniker altogether. And so we went through this sort of revolution where Microsoft said, okay, well, we're going to try to get as much into .NET 5 as we can in terms of what was originally there. And we're also going to combine it so that we drop the core moniker, we just call it .NET, it's .NET 5. And it is both the next version of the .NET framework and the next version of .NET Core. All of those are bundled into one.
We need to share a screen.
Do you want your screen shared?
Yeah, we need to do that. Yeah, we're having all these great slides to show you. Stop sharing?
I was sharing.
I'm sharing your screen now. Go ahead.
Oh, great.
It was just your video.
Oh, it was us. Okay, great. Well, the video isn't nearly as good as the text. Oh, now we're on the wrong screen. We're just trying to show this one over here. Is that what we're doing?
I was going to be able to.
Okay.
We're sharing the screen. Okay, so we're going to share screen again.
Yeah.
And put this over here. Choose share screen.
I know you shared that one again because it was fixed. Is that what you want to share?
No. Oh no, this.
Yeah. So just fix it.
Grant, thank you.
You can write software,
Stop
but
sharing.
we can't use software.
Okay, so this is right here. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Now we're sorry.
Okay. I want to sort of set the stage partially here to make sure we're clear on what's going on. In the end, there's not a whole lot of features or new features in .NET 5. So for a person that's actually writing code and working with .NET every day, there's not this overwhelming number of features. The more important thing for Microsoft is that now over time, they've got a way smaller set of code that they need to maintain. They don't need to worry about Mono, what's happening with Mono. They don't need to worry about what's happening with .NET Core. They don't need to worry about what's happening with .NET Framework. It all becomes one single code base, and they maintain all of those code bases. And slowly, Mono just ends. It's not going to end yet, but over time it will. The .NET Framework is not going to have a future development. .NET Core moves forward to become just .NET 5 as a single code base that Microsoft needs to maintain. And then around the .NET 6 timeframe, so this year in November actually, we'll start to see that Xamarin gets merged into that as well, and we get down to a single code base for all the platforms that are running .NET. And so the big feature for us is essentially that there's less that Microsoft has maintained, which means they can put more features into that framework and that everyone gets to go ahead and use. And we're no longer so worried about, okay, well, if I want to run something on iOS, which version do I choose? Do I need to use Xamarin or .NET or .NET Core or .NET Framework? It essentially becomes one .NET, and we've called the first version of that .NET 5. To see the unification of this in terms of the how it all comes together, the goal is to say we can go ahead and start having .NET Core, I shouldn't use the word, the core part of .NET, the runtime components, the compilers, the languages, all of that becomes one component that then is bundled into a set of state APIs that is made up of what makes up .NET 5. And then all the platforms like Xamarin and Azure and ASP.NET and even desktop, in the Windows case, even the desktop framework all becomes one into the .NET, under the .NET 5 moniker. That's all one tool set maintained and coded through things like Visual Studio or Visual Studio for Mac or Visual Studio Code, or if you're hardcore, you can do it on the command line. All of that becomes one interface that we're looking at.
Esther would like to know if Microsoft will be migrating Entity Framework also on the same timeline. So
can they hear the question? Or should we repeat the question? So the question that came up from Esther was, will Microsoft be migrating the .NET framework, the Entity Framework? And the answer is yes. And we expect that Entity Framework will continue to rev as part of each version of .NET. We'll continue to see a new version of Entity Framework. And it will be the Entity Framework that continues from .NET Core, not the one that was in .NET Framework 4.8. So the Entity Framework's version is going to go from the code line of .NET Core and what was involved with .NET Core. It's a good question. I think that's it for .NET Framework.
So this is a little diagram that I wanted to build because I couldn't find this particular one that really tied together how the most recent versions, the 4.5 plus versions of the .NET Framework, tie together with .NET Core, and then how those relate to .NET Standard. And we don't want to spend a long time on this because I hopefully won't be super relevant going on in the future because of how .NET 5 and .NET 6 will eventually have basically gotten us down to one code base. But let's look at .NET Core 1, and when we saw that, like Mark said, we just got the basic features. You could write websites, you could do some command line stuff, and you got a version of EF Core. Big ticket item was we can use that across multiple different OSs, so Windows, Linux, and Mac. And that was compliant with .NET Standard 1.0, which is a pretty limited API. And when you look at .NET Standard, what that is simply an interface that specifies for a particular framework that it's going to include this minimum set of things. And so .NET Framework 4.5 and .NET Core 1 both had, they were both supersets of .NET Standard, the .NET Standard 1.0 interface, let's say, the .NET Standard. So then we go to .NET Core 2, which really didn't have a lot of new features as far as any new big whiz-bang things, but it did go and represent .NET Standard 2.0, which is a huge API footprint increase over the .NET Standard 1.0. So a huge one, and brought it up in a lot of ways to have a lot of parity with the full .NET framework. And in this case, 4.7.2 was the one that supported that. Now, when we moved on, and the interesting thing was that C#7 was supported under .NET Standard 2.0. So it kind of moved there as opposed to being tied to a .NET framework or something like that. And so then we see the next version of .NET Standard 2.1 come out, which then C#8 was tied to that. So C#8 is compatible with .NET Standard 2.1, and there isn't a version of .NET Framework that is fully compliant with that standard. Now, it doesn't mean you can't use those, but as far as following that fully compliant path, that's what you get. Now, for .NET Core 3, they brought in, for Windows, again, the WPF and the Windows Forms. And so we got some of those backward compatible things that came into Core 3. And now the real unification that's happening, bringing into .NET 5, big features, C#9, Blazor, and you see there isn't a .NET standard because .NET 5 becomes the .NET standard. And really here, like Mark said earlier, we're getting that unified SDK. The interesting part here, if you look at the little white number, the white dates in the corners, these are the support dates for these products, for these different frameworks. So .NET Core will be .NET Core 2, August of this year. Then .NET Core 3 will be December, so 18, 20, 22 months away or so. Now you see that February 22 for .NET 5, which is actually just about 13 months away, because the long-term supported version of .NET 5, or in this case it'll be .NET 6, because they'll be released every year. So every year in November, we'll get a new version of .NET, and the long-term support version is planned to be .NET 6. That's what Microsoft has announced. And along with .NET 6, the planned pieces to come out are the iOS and Android support, what would typically have been done via Mono through Xamarin. And then we don't know about Unity. Unity is kind of the other big platform. They haven't formally announced, but the comments were really along the lines of, we support the LTS versions of .NET. And so pretty much all bets are on the fact that they'll probably support .NET 6. So I'm looking forward to the time when we do move to there, because that's going to really unify all of these different platforms that have really been somewhat divergent. I mean, kind of in the same place, but divergent code bases, really all into the same spot. So I think that's going to be great. And as far as the .NET standard pieces, why do we care? If you're developing libraries and things that are really going to be consumed by others, .NET standard is a great thing to target if you're trying to make it usable for people in the past. Like, for example, if people are on .NET Framework 4.7.x, you could use .NET Standard 2 and be able to have them still use that. Now, if you're consuming things, let's say you're just out looking for NuGet packages and things like that, you'll know that if you're using, like, let's say you're stuck on .NET Framework 4.5 for some reason, you won't be able to use .NET Standard 2 and .NET Standard 2.1 libraries that come under, that are compiled with that expected feature set.
So if I'm creating a new project and I'm planning on writing a library, I could write .NET 5.0.
Totally.
I can do that, but the consequences of doing that will be what? They'll
only be available for .NET 5 people, or .NET 6 or .NET 7 as those things come out.
And since I'm a library vendor, I prefer to have it as available as many people as possible.
Absolutely, get a larger user base. You can kind of reach back, and even if you're back with people on .NET Core 3, I guess, did we talk? I don't think we really have a slide where we talk about upgrading. So we just upgraded one of our production applications this week. So we decided, no, actually it was last week. We decided on Wednesday that we were going to upgrade it, and it was upgraded by Thursday. So actually it was done Wednesday night.
And we took half a day off.
Right. So it was moving from .NET Core 3 to .NET Core 5 was a pretty minor move.
In fact, my understanding is that the only reason it took longer than expected was because we decided to take advantage of some of the .NET 5 features. So
absolutely,
because there's some features in .NET 5 that we really want to take advantage of, we specifically sort of opted in or wrote some specific code that was more powerful in .NET 5, and by doing that, it took a little bit longer. But it wasn't really the upgrade process. It was really
it really was. It was a feature add. And if you're wondering what that feature was, there are some really cool features with respect to what you can do with connection strings. And we've been migrating a lot of our stuff to use Azure native AAD authentication. And so some of those things get significantly easier with .NET 5. So there are some new features in there, in addition to like the Blazor stuff. But they're not the big ticket items that you kind of did are wonderful demos.
I mean, it's somewhat of a tangent, but I really like that particular feature because of the security that it adds.
Great.
You know, we can think back, you know, in the old days, I remember writing connection strings, and the only way to connect it to SQL Server was to go ahead and put a username and a password into your connection string. And moving to Azure, we sort of had to do the same thing. But now they basically have a single sign-on or a sign-on as a service that we don't have to store credentials for. And we can allow that particular service to authenticate against the database connections.
Right. It allows you to really up your game when it comes to the security practices that you're using without having to roll passwords and do a bunch of things like that. You can use a lot of auth tokens and some more modern styles of authentication.
Well, what's important about that also is that we don't even have to know the credentials to go do stuff. So we don't have to store credentials, we don't have to track passwords, but more importantly, if the developer doesn't have to put in the credentials, so they aren't liable to what they know in terms of connecting the data.
Yeah, we were actually talking about making an account, putting the password in one time, and then literally throwing the password away because we didn't need it anymore.
And we didn't want to know
keep
it. I've got a photographic memory. Most people, right? So just a highlight one of the things that Grant said. You'll notice here in this slide here that we are going to have .NET coming out every year in November. It's the targeted time frame, and associated with that, there will be a C# release. There is expectation that C# 10 that will come out in November again, along with .NET 6, and similarly the following year .NET 7.
So Mark, are they going to call that C# X?
Oh, it's C# X. Yes, that makes a lot of sense to go along with sort of
with the whole Mac thing.
Right? Yeah, exactly. That's good. Okay. We mentioned that there's not a lot of features, but a couple of minor features just to highlight in the new versions of Visual Studio. So if you go ahead and install Visual Studio Preview, and you start to take advantage of .NET 5, or actually,
I think it's all good now.
I was going to say, just .NET, you don't even have to install the preview. One of the features that we like, because we focus a lot of time on just the quality of our code, and one of the things that's enabled, there'll be a problem before, is when you went ahead and reference different analyzers, it took quite a bit of work to figure out, okay, which one of the analyzers we wanted to have, and sort of filter through the list. And it turns out, and now there's a checkbox. You can go to project settings. So I'll actually do this in Visual Studio. You can right-click on a project and go to properties. What am I looking for? Code analysis. Here
this is an old project too, so this is you loaded up.
Oh, this is an old one.
Yeah, we got to load the new one.
Oh, I see. This is actually
WinForms
framework. Okay,
yeah, this is .NET framework. Why don't I do this little thing?
Yeah,
show that when we get there, and then I'll can go over that part.
So what that does is automatically adds a set of code analyzers into your project, and then you automatically get the warnings that those code analyzers produce.
So Mark, which set do you get? Because I know like there's always been several different sets. How do you get to choose?
Yeah, so you don't have things like localization, internationalization. Those ones aren't, but things like the runtime ones that are part of that, or if you want to check your using statements. So it's pretty. What we tend to find is it's true for all projects. The kind of stuff
this Microsoft, the one that was called like Microsoft recommended.
Right, the recommended ones. That's what. And you get to choose the analysis level. You can see here you can choose analysis level 5, or they're continuing to rev these rules. Cool. And so as new versions of the analyzers get updated, you'll automatically opt into those. And you're basically going to add those packages into your project.
So I can choose latest to get whatever the .NET 6 when I get there.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's actually the latest of those analyzers, ones that come out for 5. And then there's preview versions of ones.
Sure, you can go to preview.
So right now, If you chose preview, you're going to get .NET.
Oh, cool.
Good. Another really cool feature that is not necessarily a .NET specific feature, but a Visual Studio feature is the ability to go ahead and do code spaces. You guys have probably seen this already, where if you're trying to connect to Linux environments, you can go ahead and set up a Linux VM and connect to that Linux VM over SSH. And code spaces sort of goes one step further. Let's imagine that you only have Visual Studio on your machine, but you don't have any ability to, you don't have any the Go libraries installed, for example. And I just tried this on a Go project recently. You can connect your code spaces to go do this. And what essentially happens is you open up Visual Studio and you notice that there's an additional option here for connect your code spaces, which is GitHub. It's associated with your GitHub identity once you've gone ahead and signed up. And if you launch this today, it'll go ahead and say you got to go ahead and request to belong, and you can request to join the beta for the code spaces. And the next, not quite the next slide, but soon after that, you can pick your repository URL, and then you can actually pick, with a powerful feature here, you can pick, well, what kind of machine do you want to have? And based on that repository, it's going to figure out, well, what do you have to have installed to go ahead and use that. And then you can choose, because obviously when you're spinning it up, you're actually spinning up a VM.
And Azure, so there's some Azure spend.
It is. You're going to do some Azure spend here. Microsoft's not shy about making sure you get Azure, some Azure.
Make it easy to spend money.
Right. Azure spend, exactly. It's important. But more importantly, so you can go spin up a higher powered environment, or you can run off a low powered Mac environment, or if you say you want to work on a Mac and you do work on Windows because you want to do WinForms stuff.
Right.
Hypothetically speaking, not that you want to do.
Not that you ever want to not work on a Mac.
Oh, right. Okay, that too. And so the advantage of here is it automatically go spin up the environment, get the requisites you installed, and then allow you to go ahead and suspend that environment after a specific period of time, so you're not burning money after you.
So if I use it, I forget about it, it'll automatically shut off. If I keep using it, I can want to still.
Exactly.
Great.
And then once you do that, it's actually going to connect through SSH. You're going to see it at the bottom. It's actually going to connect through SSH, and every single time you're editing the files locally, but it's going to go ahead and upload those files to that servers and allow them to keep in sync. So essentially now you can work against a VM that's located anywhere. And before we could do this through the remote connect. So if you look at Visual Studio Code, I think
it's like an automatic remote debugging session where you don't have to worry about the system that it's running on.
Right, but it's more powerful in the sense that it's not just a remote debugging session, it's actually setting up the VM that you want to connect to. And so here, I'll go ahead and show this to you guys quickly. Here you'll notice this is just using the WCL Connect. I'm just using SSH to connect to an existing session that I set up. So I set up this Go library right here that I wanted to go connect to. In this case, it's running on a Ubuntu 18.04 just as a WCL target. And it automatically synchronizes code and does everything I want to do. But the advantage of this is I don't even specify, all I specify is what's the requisite of the machine, and it creates the instance of the machine, and I can connect to. So there's actually a drop down. You can imagine if you go to our source code here. So you can go here. So we actually have our source code in here. You could click drop this drop down here, and not only do you get these three options, you'd actually get a connect to code spaces option, and that'll actually instantiate the entire environment for you. Get your source code, copy it through a Git clone,
and you can go check it out.
And then you can start checking it out and modify it, code it, run it, assuming
probably commit back to Git.
And commit back to Git. It's all in this virtual environment. You basically set that up. So I think the key thing is to understand now from the browser, I could actually go ahead and connect to this code spaces environment. And that's available right now. You can join the beta and be a part of that to go and see that. So, let's go back to slides. Is that going to give you there?
Yep, there we go. All right, let's talk about source code generators.
Let's do.
Something that I was super excited about and still have some excitement there. It isn't quite as much. I kind of let the cat out of the bag, but yeah. So
I could just sense there was a sound.
I know there's a little sound there. So use cases. The idea of being able to generate source code as a part of not some kind of afterthought, but as a part of the compile itself. I think it's a super powerful way that you can interact with your code and be able to really add features that you were never able to do before. And so some primary use cases here, MS build tasks. And these are a lot of the kind of code behind things that folks would do. For example, you're going to compile your code. You're then going to go back and maybe use some kind of a Roslyn analyzer or something else to maybe generate an additional library. Maybe you're going to do that beforehand to generate a library that's going to get compiled in that maybe has things that you're pulling out of your code that are maybe magic strings and things like that.
So it's a pre-full compile. it does something in your code, and then it's going to go. Right. This allows you to do something in your code and then build.
And then yeah, and then build some things on that. And
sorry, I had a couple comments. The resolution's really fuzzy. Is there a way you can drop your resolution so that it's not going to?
Okay. Yeah. We'll run a resolution down. Let's just change so down to 1080p or something. Ooh, that's the weirdest way. Why is that different? Anyway, well, you're working on that. I'll keep on talking. So another task is reflection. For example, if you had, let's say you had a website with a bunch of controllers and you wanted to make a table of contents. This could create a table of contents for you.
How's that?
Does that look better? Some comments?
Mine's on it, but
mine looks okay here. I have a separate one up on this laptop, so that's
okay. Hopefully that's better. I did just change that resolution down. So.
And then there's a third use case for things that just get stuck as strings, even though we have name of and some other really nice pieces of some nice features in C#. There are some times when you get stuck with magic strings, and this can go through, parse out some of those things, because again, you're just using those syntax trees in Roslyn to be able to do this. Now, this is where that little disappointment in my voice kind of came in, was it doesn't really enable full-blown object-oriented programming. And
aspect-oriented.
I'm sorry, aspect. It is.
I think
we've had that for a while.
For
a while. Yeah, absolutely. The aspect-oriented programming piece, and really this is where you could maybe put an attribute on your class or on a particular method, and it would build things in automatically. Like what Kevin would do is something like IL weaving. That would be a great example of that. So, and the real piece here is that if you flip to the next slide, we'll kind of talk through some of these things. And maybe there's the next slide. Okay, so here's really the feature, or you call it limitation, whatever you want to call that, but you can only create new files. Now, the nice thing is C# has the ability to do partials. And so you can modify your existing classes by using these partials to do that, but there are limitations. Like I can't modify a method without having already put a hook in the method for something else that I want to call. So if you want to do those kinds of things, it's totally possible. And I think what the dream here is for Microsoft is that people are going to start trying this out, and they're going to start writing these things. And because they work like analyzers, they can be packaged up.
Meaning when they run.
When they run, right. When they run, they run like analyzers, and they run unordered in this case, just like the analyzers do. So there are a few little tricky parts, but it means that your compilation steps, you can build these things right into the process, and rather than having them be something that's always kind of felt bolted on. So does it support everything? No, but I think it's this great feature that they're putting out there for people in the community to try. And I think if you are at all interested in code gen, this is the place where you want to go and start, because you're going to have a lot of community support. You're going to be on a really robust platform. And I think you're going to see, if you come up with something that is pretty intriguing to the community, a pretty good uptake in the use of things like that. So it doesn't, I'll kind of walk through some of these other ones. It supports pretty complex scenarios. Again, because this is built into the compiler, it's not a bolted on thing. You don't have to script out a bunch of PowerShell to run a compile, then use these Roslyn things and run another compile. Like we said before, you can't directly change code. So if you have a class, you can't go in and modify that class, like modify the actual source code. Currently, and again, this is kind of in its 1.0 version, so you're not going to get a wonderful debug story. And this is tricky, right? Because the code is actually like blocks of text, and you can do it some other ways, but that's kind of the way it is. And right now, within Visual Studio, there isn't a great debug experience for like, where am I in this code? So when I'm debugging after I've compiled it, it's not super obvious yet. I mean, there's still some steps, and Microsoft knows this, and I think they're going to make some improvements to this over time, obviously depending on how it catches on. And for everybody, there's this issue of magic. I think we all have various relationships with things that are more or less magic, and those who don't like magic are programming in assembly and C++, and those who like magic are okay with some of these kinds of things. And so there is some magic there. And when you install these, you just kind of get new features, and you have to realize that that's what you're taking. And again, when the debug story gets better, I think that's going to improve. And the VS integration, if you go and try this, and you'll see this in some of the tutorials and things like that, you'll notice that you write your analyzer for your source generator, and you'll go and run it. And let's say it adds a method to a class through a partial class. and you go into your class and you type the name of the thing, dot, and the class isn't there. And then you restart Visual Studio, and it runs. And so there's just some little things like that I think these will go away with time. But just know there is a little bit of friction if you want to be an early adopter. But I think it's a really great step on the part of Microsoft to try to give us something like this. That there are all kinds of issues if we start changing source code. I mean, that's a whole can of worms. I think they just intentionally said, hey, let's give this a try, because I think there's a lot of really solid use cases here. Let's let the community explore it. Let's see what we can get, and then leverage where we're having success. So,
do you have any examples of where you can see this playing out?
You know, oh, you mean just like
where I would actually want to use a source generator?
Well, like for example, I think you were doing something else at the time, but let's say you wanted to make a sitemap or something like that, where I wanted to have like a list of here's all the controllers in my class, or maybe I wanted to build out a test harness or something like that. I wanted to build out a test harness class. Yeah. I could go in and build those things out based on what Rosalind gave me back. Do that. I think it could be really nice.
I think the thing that highlights for me is I could do some of those things, including like through reflection or something like this.
Right.
But this allows me to do it at compile time, and essentially I can analyze the source code and then generate the code right there rather than a post-compile tool.
And that's a great point, because what you end up with are, I think the Rosalind or the reflection case is a really great one, because number one, whenever you do reflection isn't like the super fastest thing that you can do, and so there is some penalty for going through that code. And by doing it at compile time, you're basically putting all of that logic up front in your code during compile, paying the price then, so that you don't have to pay it every time you start your app. So yeah, I think that's a great use case.
And the other scenario is you can write a tool that uses reflection after the fact. This allows you to basically do before your assembly is built to go ahead and run those.
Right, or while your assembly is built.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It happens right.
I was just trying to highlight the difference.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Okay, we'll talk about XAML.
Okay.
We're just going to talk about it a little bit. If we were talking to Kevin, because Kevin's kind of he's my go-to XAML guru guy whenever I need answers on this. And so XAML, as you can see in the diagram we put up a little bit ago, it actually came in .NET Core 3. However, there were a number of limitations, and this happens often when they put something new in. There's a big push to get it into the framework, but then a lot of the tooling kind of has to catch up. And so there's some design time things that came in. There's some new data binding diagnostics. Diagnostics used to be a little trickier. Now there's some things that kind of pop up. I think the thing that people are most excited about is the hot reload, so that I can go and change something, and I'm seeing the changes.
Kind of like you can on the web.
Right, like you could on the web, like if you were using one of the frameworks there that allows you to do the hot reloading. Yeah, same kind of thing. I think this is a great experience. And then looking at Xamarin Forms and WinUI 3. WinUI 3 hasn't released yet. I don't know that there's a hard date on that at this point. And then really looking at forward to .NET 6 and the full-blown Xamarin integration, which to me, that's a huge move to consolidate this all to the platform, because we're then pulling in all of the folks who've been using Mono. And I think Mono, while it's kept up well, there are some pieces that just have tended to lag behind, and you maybe don't get that first-class experience like you do using some of the .NET Core stuff, which is where all the energy has been put for the last 5 years. So I'm excited for that community to be able to experience that.
Yeah, and just to be clear about what Grant means by that is essentially right now you're still choosing to build a Xamarin project or a .NET 5 project.
Yep.
And once you got Xamarin in .NET 6 in that time frame, because it's supposed to be .NET 5, but once you get .NET 6, the whole idea is that we then say, hey, I want to create a project, and I can go ahead and compile it for Xamarin, or compile it for iOS, or I can go compile it for Windows, or compile it for Android. All of those things will just compile it down. The exact same source code base, just a single compile, multiple compiles.
With the caveat of the same ones you have now, so you're going to have some UI differences and things like that.
But it's the shared runtime.
It really is.
The source code is all coming from one set of base libraries. I do want any questions that we got going on here so far? Let me quickly move this over here.
Great. All right, I want to talk about WinForms, and I just think it honestly came out in .NET Core 3, but again, it's been brought up to speed inside .NET 5, and a lot of new stuff in there, a lot of parity, pretty good parity with the regular .NET Framework 4.7.x. lots of things coming in. You can see the ones here. I won't go through them all, but the designer and all that just works. And what I want to show is I want to show how to upgrade a project. And this, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I think if you've been waiting to migrate your WinForms project, if you still have one, and honestly, I was watching some Microsoft videos about kind of the path forward with all the different UI frameworks. Because really, you think about it, you have MSC, you have WinForms, you have WPF, you have UWP, and they're all, and there's a new one coming, this the WinUI 3. So that's really another one that isn't really the ring to rule them all, but I think is the good path going forward. But there's a lot of really great use cases for these other ones, and I think Microsoft realizes that, and that's why we're seeing WinForms brought forward into .NET 5.
But yeah, let me go ahead.
Yeah, let's take a look. So here is just a really basic form. This is actually a 4.7 app. Go ahead and open that, and let's look at the designer for the form.
And those are the ones where they were saying it's blurry, so I don't know.
Oh, these ones are.
Is it still blurry?
Yeah, dude, you can't even read that.
I have already changed my resolution.
Change the zoom factor on the monitor. Yeah, go to like 150 or something. Yeah, maybe that's good. See if that's better. Okay, great.
How's that looking?
Let me see that, I guess.
Can you guys see that?
You need to respond in the chat.
There we go. Okay, so you get some nice things like all this. If you've ever done any WinForms, you kind of get the anchoring.
Man, it was so easy back then.
It was so easy, right? As I did this, it was like reminiscing about the old days, having a bunch of nostalgia.
Like
so
EV3.
So if we start this, that was a good day. I wrote a lot of code in EV3.
EV6.
So here's the app. It is a game.
Oh, excellent.
So we're going to challenge Mark to see if he can get it. We're going to go. Let's see. Let's do Wesley.
I have no idea.
You have no idea.
I have no idea.
Well, it's Carrie Ellis. And so you guess, and then it's correct. And Miracle Max, Billy Crystal.
That one I can follow.
Now, actually, I'm going to show you something. So I'm going to pick Robin White, who,
that doesn't
or Robin
seem like
Wright,
that
who,
fits.
but it's always this correct. So I was hoping you were going to have some two-way
You should have
stuff.
given me quotes. I couldn't handle the quotes.
You totally could. I should have done that. Like, here's the.
I could handle
Yeah.
Oh man.
So anyway, here's the app. What I want to do is kind of show you what it looks like to go ahead and make the changes. So I have another one I'm just going to kind of pull out of the oven because it does take a few minutes to do that. There's a lot of copying, not a lot of copy and pasting, but some copy and pasting. But I want to show what that looks like. So what we're going to do is, and it's funny when you go back, and I haven't been working with full framework projects for a while, you kind of forget some of these things. But in this case, we have to actually unload the project because you can't edit the CS proj file at the same time. And so now I can see the CS proj file.
Goodness.
Look at this thing. There's a ton of stuff in here. Like, it is really significant. And one of the biggest things in here is all of these files and having to tell it all the
Every
files.
single one. And you have to name every file, otherwise it's not going to be.
It's not going to be brought in. So you look at all this stuff, and there's what, about 3 pages. How many lines? About 83 lines of stuff that you have to bring in. So what I want to do is go in. Let's go open up this new project. Let's see here. Push this over here, and we'll open up the one that I migrated.
You mean this?
Yeah, I did actually. There's a second window. All right, so here's the new one, and we'll right click and take a look at this. So now, oh, you know, you can't just rename it. Oh, look at that. Oh, wow. We went from 83 down to 13 lines. Pretty amazing. So really, the only thing that you have, what the recommended way to do this is, you basically get this part here, which is just telling you, I want to win executable, I want .NET 5. Now look, it says .NET 5 Windows. Why? What's going on?
Yeah. So I assume that WinForms only runs on Windows. Is that?
Well, it's not WinForms. It's actually Windows. It's short for Windows Forms, believe it or not.
So when I choose my target framework, I say .NET 5 for Windows, and that allows me to then use what's part of .NET 5 related to just Windows-only libraries.
Right. Which is.
And if I chose .NET 5, Net 5.0 only without the dash Windows, I assume all those assemblies would say, yep, that doesn't work.
You don't get any of that stuff.
Right. So essentially, that allows me to choose what platforms I'm running on, which APIs are available to me.
Right.
Which
Exactly.
assemblies I can use.
Exactly. For example, one of the things that happens in this application, if we look here, if I open up this form, and I'll show you a couple things. We're going to open the form, maybe. Hopefully it'll open. Or we're just going to watch this little thing go by. Oh, and now we're stuck. I think we're waiting for the designer to load. This is the good old days when we got to wait for these things. So here, if we, and you can see, if I click on this and you drag, you still get all your, essentially zero changes. This is exactly what it was before. And if we open up and look at some of this code, you can see here, I am actually using a registry key. So I'm going out and touching a Windows only thing. And it was before when you were in .NET Core 3, you had to pull in another library to do some of those things. But now when you go in and choose to use this, it's going to pull in all those things that you need. And you see there aren't any dependencies on anything else. I haven't loaded any NuGet packages, nothing like that. So it all is that way. And then use Windows Forms. There is a flag in there for that, and then just your generate some info.
So did you create a new CS project and then drag these files in, or did you take the original CS project file and just?
So I made a copy. Okay. The recommendation is you make a clone or a backup, and then I literally just went in. Of course. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely.
You made the source code control copy.
A source code control. I would never just copy a file from one folder to another. Come on now.
I get it. Sure.
Even if it's a test,
just a branch.
It's a branch. You're going to make a branch, and you're going to work in the branch. And then really, all you have to add in, the only thing that's specific are these two things, just to your project, so you can see what you can set your namespaces.
So now, does the code analysis window show up now? Can we see it?
Oh, I think we should. Yeah, we can go back.
Right click on that and go to properties.
Yeah.
Go to code analysis.
Code analysis, and look
there
at all
they
the
are.
stuff.
So there we get to go into
enable.NET. See, look at all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of those are warnings.
Supported on Windows. There you go.
To indicate that it's supported on Windows. Yeah, interesting. And if you changed your framework to not say -Windows, would you get build error? I mean, I assume you're getting build errors then. Huh?
Yeah. Well, here's this.
No,
like if I went back. If we go back in the project file.
So if we delete that, I assume that stuff now.
And we may have to get rid of this one.
Win.exe is going to replace that too.
Yeah, so I think now we have.
So now we get errors.
Yeah, now we have errors.
Okay. Interesting.
Anyway. But yeah, there's some. I think this. If you're thinking about moving your WinForms project, I think this is a great time to go ahead and take that move and see about moving your WinForms thing. Because the bottom line is that if you have something, I think that's sunsetting in the next couple of years, you're going to start over development. It's probably not worth it. But I think if you're looking to carry something on into the future, it's probably a good idea.
I think what's important too now is that in .NET Framework 4.8 is the last .NET Framework version we're going to see. So in the past, we could continue doing .NET Framework development because there were new version was going to be released. With .NET 5, we're essentially saying .NET Framework is now forcing you to say you have to go to .NET 5. But it is actually the next path. It's sort of the next version, but in order to upgrade to that version, you have to change your CS project file. So what you've shown for a Windows Form project is the exact same thing you do for a .NET Framework project. With the exception that in the case of ASP.NET, you actually had to go migrate and change some libraries.
It's the ASP.NET. So it's really interesting, and I think you brought this up when we were talking about this the other day, is that because they were kind of in a bind, because you had, anytime you have a framework that goes for a while, you get some things in there that you may or may not want, and something that looked good 10 years ago maybe doesn't look so good, not so shiny today. So when they grabbed a lot of the stuff, because you're either going to make it really, really clean, or you're going to make it backward compatible. And so it's an interesting dilemma, and I don't have a ton of insight into that.
So what I've noticed is .NET Core 1.0 was really clean. I mean, like you just talk, oh man, there was some APIs they didn't change that I super great. I would love them to change process. I mean, there were some that's such an but there's a whole bunch of stuff that they did change, and they said, hey, we're only going to provide async APIs, for example, and some things, or there's only going to be this. But then the challenge came, which was really clean and great for people who are starting .NET new. Right? If you're going to go new project, start from scratch, but if you had to migrate, and it turns out there's a lot of .NET source code out there. And so for those people, they eventually sort of had to say, we need to get some of those old APIs into the framework, or in this case, .NET Standard or .NET Standard 2. And so they started moving stuff. And that's why .NET Standard 2.1 supports Windows Form under Windows only, so that you can more easily migrate your project. So it was not easy with .NET Core 1.0. Even with .NET Core 2, there were still some problems. But finally, I think with .NET 5, we're at the point now where it's easy to migrate a project, because essentially the code is just going to go ahead and run. And what we've shown you with Windows Forms is just the same thing you're going to have to do if you have a console app or something like that. You're just going to go ahead and change the project file and compile under .NET 5, and it should work. That said, and I think of the ASP.NET scenarios, there were some specific changes to those APIs, but they're well identified, well called out. You're going to get compilers.
There's
so
a lot
not
of
a huge
advice.
migration. I would say even for large ASP.NET projects, we haven't seen projects that lasted that long. I would say they're all sub-week, at worst in most cases.
And most of it is in your pipelines, right? Most of it is not in your controllers, and most of it isn't in your EF. Those are really pretty stable across from MVC 5 across to .NET 5 in this case. So let's, before we leave this, you see how this is so short. I mean, fundamentally, we had a change in how the CS project files work in between these. And I always wonder this. I remember when the CS project files first came out, I go, why do I have to add this every single time? Yeah, in the .NET framework, when we first had the CS projects, this is a nightmare every time you want to add anything. And going really from, hey, I want to put everything in a whitelist, to really more of a blacklist concept, which I think is really a significant move forward, and a lot more things done by convention rather than configuration. And so I really appreciate that particular change. You get a lot more things that just work out of the box. And I think when you look at the direction that C# and some of those things are going, with just being able to make things that just work without removing some of the pomp and circumstance, even around like your mains and things like that.
I mean, that is pretty radically different. But again, this is a change we saw with .NET Core.
It was, right. Yeah, initially in JSON, but then we went back to the CS project files. And in a lot of ways, I probably should have mentioned this before, but I remember when it first came out, right around 2000, and you hear this idea, and you're doing
when .NET Framework.
When .NET Framework first came out, right? And the idea of being able to run cross-platform and have a single kind of thing that we're going to do, and then there were some issues with open sourcing back then, and people were a lot more reticent to do that. And now you see this shift that's happened over the course of the last 10 years. It's really moved. Well, yeah, but really moving to open source, right? Where Microsoft has gotten rid of the walled garden and really gone into the public, I think, in ways that have challenged other companies in a lot of ways. And I think we're seeing, while 20 years later, dream fulfilled. And I think really when we see .NET 6,
and it's not just open source; it's cross-platform.
Right, cross-platform open source, right? Which is really amazing. So that's good stuff.
And I suspect, and I'm not saying anything in terms of knowing first-hand knowledge, but I suspect the next revolution is to get UI, right? I mean, that'd be nirvana, is when you can actually start getting UI. Well, in the same way that Xamarin does it, we can start getting that Windows.
Right, and so I think which is really interesting. We're going to talk about Blazor just a little bit, so and UI stuff is really interesting, because I think there is a discussion about whether or not the traditional UI is not dead, but is there? What is the path forward for anything that is non-browser, right? And what does that look like? And what do those apps? What are those going to look like in the long term? So, okay. Oh, I totally forgot. This was in the wrong place. I didn't even run this through. Dang. Let's look at the .NET Portability Analyzer. Since we're going over this stuff, let's pop back to the original WinForms application. So there is a Portability Analyzer, and if I load my project back up, reload, you can come in here, right-click on your project, and choose. I feel like your code is in a slightly different spot. What version are you on? I wonder if this isn't in.
This is preview.
Is it preview?
I have the other one.
Forward? Oh, 69. Yeah, why isn't it here? Do I have to click on the solution?
There should be a menu for.
Yeah, there should be a menu for. Oh, I'm sorry. Dang it, we forgot to load it. It's okay. Let me just tell you what this does. There's an extension. Maybe we just have to go and load it. Yeah, go ahead. We just have to load an extension. I forgot to tell you to load the. Looks like we'll have to go in there, Manage and then portability, you're on the keyboard. So this is really kind of a great setup, because you have a mouse and a keyboard, and I have a mouse and a keyboard, and it's causing us a lot of
my
fun.
mouse is bigger. Does that make it?
Well, I
think I got a rat. He's got a mouse.
Okay. Portability, here we go, .NET Portability Analyzer. Now we're gonna have to shut down this thing. And okay, so we'll do this, close, and we have to close our other version of Visual Studio 2. It's not gonna like that open, don't save those. Okay, so it's gonna install our Visix package. What this is for is this goes through, and you don't have to click on that, you can just click on modify. It analyzes based on the APIs you're using in your project and lets you know how much alignment you have with the .NET 5 and actually other libraries. So as we go through this, we'll at the end, you kind of see there's a little report that it generates up for us that will give us some kind of an idea of, hey, if you're moving to here, these are the things you're gonna have to worry about. And then you can go and look in your source code and find the spots where you're using those particular libraries and make some modifications.
And we could do this before, just again, from .Framework to .NET Core, right? The difference now is the fact that it's including things like WinForms,
right,
making that migration, so we couldn't even migrate before. It would be much more difficult.
Absolutely. Why isn't it doing anything? Too much thinking.
We can keep going.
Why is there smoke coming out of your computer? Okay, let's keep on going. We can come back to that. Okay, this is what I was going to do during the demo, but then I got so excited about running all this good stuff. You do have to upgrade your NuGet packages if you're using NuGet packages. That's a key thing. So you just go ahead and upgrade those. Manually upgrade your project file. Oh, and when I say upgrade your NuGet packages, if you are doing a migration, it is best to move, even if you're on .NET, the full .NET framework, to go ahead and upgrade to the most recent versions, because the ones that you're going to grab in .NET 5 are also going to be the latest versions of those. And then you're going to have the best compatibility when using those. And if you're using .NET Standard 2,
it should just work.
It should just work, right? You should just do that. And honestly, in some ways, I was a little disappointed because hey, we don't get a whole bunch of new things in .NET 5, but Microsoft really went back and said, we need to do this for the developers. We need to not leave people in the dust and do this for them. So, yeah, let's see if we can. There should be some code covers on here or some pieces.
It's still loading.
Yeah. Okay, let's pop back to the slides. Okay, there we go.
Resources.
Oh, resources. There are some, if you're using resource files in, the resx files that pop up when you're using WinForms apps, there may be some things you have to do with those as opposed with some of the opt-in, opt-out, just to make sure they get into your source code. And then if there are any issues in those, just making sure everything gets tied up correctly. So again, there's some really nice, just not a lot of steps, probably about 5 steps, walkthroughs that Microsoft has.
One of the keys I think they said is important is that you do check that as much as possible the libraries you're using are .NET Standard compatible. As long as they're .NET 2 or 2.1 compatible, right, then they're probably going to work. But if you've got libraries that are not compatible, then you're going to be stuck. Those are going to be pain points that you're going to have for sure.
Yep, definitely. Wow, how did all my slides get like bunched up in one spot?
Beginning, do I have anything to cover?
I don't know if you do. Okay, let's talk about Blazor a little bit. So Blazor, let me pull up a brand new window here. Actually, let me do slides first. Oh, did I press escape?
You did. I got it.
Shift F5. Great.
Oh, thanks.
Did you know that shortcut? You would have never known that. It's a good thing I told you. So Blazor is now unified on .NET 5. Blazor really comes in 2 flavors. It comes in what you call a server side.
Blazor, wow, what?
Blazor, what is Blazor? Blazor is an experiment by Microsoft that is now part of .NET 5. Okay. And I think that what was just literally an experiment to see, hey, what would happen if? Yeah. And the first thought was, can we run .NET in WebAssembly on the browser? Right. Can we write some kind of middleware that will allow us to, in WebAssembly, actually run the full framework libraries unmodified in IL, right? In that intermediate language, a .dll kind of thing uploaded to the browser, will it work? And surprisingly enough, in like version 0.01, it worked. And they were able to get this stuff going. And obviously, there were limitations. And so with the idea that if you've done any kind of web development, you realize that the concept count is pretty high. right? There's a good size concept count because you're looking at C# and JavaScript and TypeScript if you're kind of serious about that, and CSS and HTML and all these different things.
XML, if you're working with CS patch file.
Right, XML, some JSON, all the different things. And so what they said is, what would it be like if we could write C# and have that run on the client? And so it started there, and then what also, and there's really these two pieces. And so you have this WebAssembly piece, and when you hear about Blazor WebAssembly, that means I am taking libraries that are compiled into IL, that's C#, or I guess you could probably use VB or any .NET language, and literally taking those and pushing them to the client, in this case the client pulling them and running them on the client.
So now I'm using C# to modify DOM. Is that what's going on? I don't have to write the JavaScript. I can write less JavaScript.
I can write less JavaScript. In fact, you can write no JavaScript if you want to write no JavaScript. So there are two models, right? So you have this WebAssembly model. Now you can imagine when you push stuff up there. Did I have another slide about this? Okay, yeah. Let's see. I didn't put a slide in for this. We'll talk about it. You can imagine loading those DLLs. They're fairly large, but with CDNs and things like that, you're only going to take that hit once, and the performance is actually getting pretty decent. And I'll show you guys how that works. There is some concern about that. It is fairly heavy. The nice thing is that everything happens on the client, so you can basically offload all of that over there. And so we have clients who are now starting to ask us about, hey, is this a viable?
Clients are actually doing this.
They've actually decided to jump. So this is, there's getting to be a lot of users out there. A lot of people are looking at this as something where they can say, hey, dev team, this is an attractive option, and I think people are excited about it.
We have large projects that are starting to do big Blazor projects.
Yeah, big projects. And so the other side is the server side, and I'll kind of show an example of each. But the server piece is SignalR. If you're not familiar with that, is a way to pass things back and forth, really lightweight, kind of subscription.
Notifications back to the client, to browser. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And imagine if you basically were rendering the page on the server and you were just passing to the client just the deltas, right? So all the rendering takes place on the server, and you have this super lightweight. Now imagine for like IoT devices and really, really thin clients that don't have much horsepower on the far end, you want to be able to run really robust frameworks. And even with Blazor, what's cool is you can layer on existing JavaScript frameworks, because at the end of the day, you're still in a browser. You still have HTML, you still have JavaScript, you still have CSS if you want to use those things. So there's really diverse use cases that come out of this. And I think people are just starting to scratch the surface about what you can actually do.
Do you ever want to combine both, or is it just one of them?
Yeah, you can. If you want to do both of these approaches, I think that's totally viable. So here's basic architecture diagrams. I mean, if you look at here, you see in this case, the whole thing is running in the browser. And here's your WebAssembly, .NET, all the different Razor components that you're going to use, and these are interacting through this little Blazor piece to modify the DOM. Again, you're just doing HTML, in this case CSS and all that. And in this case, it's kind of the same way, but you're modifying the DOM at a distance where this actually is here. Now, it has some of the limitations that you kind of think about, because, for example, you have to have sticky sessions if you want to run Blazor server, because a particular machine is holding your state, and so you have to make sure you're coming back to that one. So there may be some scalability issues. I think it's now in a full production 1.0 version, so I think it's stable and all that. But you just have to know what the tool does. So you pick the right tool at the right time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a relatively vanilla, because honestly, the vanilla stuff from Blazor is really good. All right. Where's this Visual Studio? Do you have Visual Studio installed? Unpin. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll just create a new project. And Blazor. Whoops. I don't know which one I hit. It's a class library. Here we go, Blazor app. And when you click on Blazor app, you can see lots of different options. And here we go. This is weird.
It's weird.
But we're going to see what happens. Ah, good. And this is, I wasn't sure where it was going to show us where this was going to happen. We can choose .NET 5 in this case, and we can either choose to have a server-side app, or we can choose to have the WebAssembly fully client-side app. So we'll go ahead and build the server-side app first. Go ahead and build this out.
It's different because I'm running preview, is that correct?
No, it's just I have a bad memory. I did this twice and I still can't remember. Actually, I did it 3 or 4 times and I still can't remember what it is. So when you look over here, this actually has the look of like a fairly regular website. A regular website, right? You have your www root folder, although not a lot of stuff. I mean, it's just kind of your typical things. And then here you have your pages, and here are the different pages. And where it really gets interesting is this page right here where it says counter. And if you will open this page, and this is a Razor page, and here you see some of the stuff here. You have a heading. And then you see this. This is just typical Razor syntax. Right. It's just regular Razor syntax, but I haven't passed in a model. Like I'd usually pass in, like if I was doing MVC, I'd pass in a model, and then I would throw that information out. But oh, look, there's this code down here, and I've defined current count here, and I've just created a method called increment count that's private. Question?
Kelly has a question. Is tree shaking the .NET runtime in WASM a feature that is on the roadmap?
It's already implemented. Oh, for WebAssembly tree shaking?
Yes.
I'm trying to think if there's any reason this wouldn't work. Tree shaking is a part of this. We'd have to check to see if you publish this. Let's see if the tree shaking option is there. I guess go to a folder, I guess. Yeah, fine. Edit. File publish options. Let's see if it's in there. Is that if you drop, will that drop down yet? I don't see it. Self-contained. And trim unused assemblies. So it does look like there's some stuff in there. We'd have to test it to make sure that it does exactly what we're thinking.
We can do this one. I was going to show single file deployment, so we can do that.
Yeah, this is a little bit weird because it's a website, but yeah, I haven't tried this particular use case.
I'll let you finish it.
Okay, yeah, then we'll go look at that. So here we're seeing all the code right in this Razor page, and you just have this nice little on-click. And in a way, what this reminds me of.
So where is this running? Where is that C# going to run?
We're going to answer that question in just a second. This is the surprise. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to toss a breakpoint on that line and see what happens. So we're going to fire this up. What does this kind of remind? This reminds me like a little bit of web forms almost. Because
exactly.
Yeah, we want to do that. Yes. Yeah, it's almost like harkening back to all of the really, I don't want to use the word nasty, but let's say convoluted JavaScript and things that happen.
Because we're embedding C# inside HTML, all inside the same file, like a Razor file.
Yeah, like Razor file. So here's the file, and we're going to click on this. Oh, whoops. Oh, yeah, you can't even see it over here. It's a good thing you're here. So here is, I guess everybody can see that. We're going to click on counter, and oh, you know what? I'm going to put this over here. I'm going to click, and we hit the breakpoint over here on our server side, and we'll increment, and you can see. You see this full IntelliSense, all the debugging things that you want, and now we go over here and you see that the counter is incremented. So what's happening is we have a SignalR connection between the client and the server. The client sees that that thing was clicked. It calls the method that is automatically built into some kind of API endpoint that allows that thing to run obviously through SignalR in this case. And then returns that particular piece of information. So gives back the current count and increments it. So it's a whole nother way of doing it. We can look at this fetch data real quick. This is some weather forecast information. I'll just pop this up so you can see it. Pull up the Solution Explorer again. So here's the Razor page, and here it's just if there's a forecast, show the loading, temperature information. And here we can just call one of our helper methods that's going to get the forecast. And if we navigate into get forecast, we'll just see it throw together some random data. And if we put a breakpoint here, and I refresh this page, you see the breakpoint happens right here. And what's surprising is the performance is significantly better than I thought it was going to be. Right? You know, whenever you kind of going back and forth, we had that whole discussion about do you want chatty or chunky apps. This is kind of going back to a little bit of the chatty stuff. So it's an interesting.
This is now on the server side.
This is on the server side, right? So there's just really super thin running on the client side as minimum as it can in order to render the DOM, make the changes, get the eventing straight, and then everything runs back on the server. So let's look now at another project. We'll just fire up the client side project. So we'll stop debugging this, start another instance of Visual Studio, and this is still trying to connect like that. So. New project. Oops. Oh, now I'm mistake. New project. And it's probably right here. Blazor app. Blazor app 2. And this time we will choose instead this Blazor WebAssembly. And so now what we'll see is all the stuff loaded on the client, and we can open up some of the debug pieces. Now, some of the debug stuff, I haven't had a lot of chance to go in and look at that, and we're just covering this really cursorily. If folks are interested, please comment if you want.
We actually have some people that are pretty experienced in this. We'd like to do a whole session, a whole user group session on those.
So again, if there's interest, and we could almost probably do a whole session on one and then the other. And what's interesting is that the files are, oops, wrong file. Here's the counter. This is pretty much the same. I mean, it's very, very similar. Now, the fetch data, while it looks pretty much the same and all this is the same, down here, this is different. You see now here we're talking, we're making a web call. And we're, in this case, just loading some data here. So, but it is a JSON type call, which is what you do, because you have to think about getting your data is a little bit different when you're fully running on the client side. So let's fire this up.
But it has a type, so it's obviously converted that JSON into a full class.
Right, full class, yeah, right. So again, you're all C# here. What you would have had to write in JavaScript is C#. Windows Defender, should they allow it? Maybe. Okay, so here you can see the app, and it looks basically like the other app did. Here's the counter. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come into the counter. I'll have to pull up this again and look at the counter, and we're going to put a breakpoint right here. I'm going to click. Oh, did I load the wrong one? Did I click the wrong one? What? Why is it doing this? This is not what I expected. Unless this is the preview.
Yeah.
I wonder if this actually works. Let's look at this. So okay, this is great. If this is the way it works. Let's reload our page. Let's restart this. Reload our page. And when you look at the network tab,
A few people saying they would love a session on Blazor.
okay, great. Well, we can do that. I wonder what this is. Yeah, I'm just wondering why it's not loading the page. Let's just restart and see what happens. All right. Oh, I forgot to open up my F12 window. So here's your Blazor WebAssembly. And here is our .NET 5.0. And I think it may just have put it.
Counter?
Yeah, if we go to counter, and there's no back and forth. There's no open connection here. It's
Client.
all running on the client. And I think what they've done is they've added the debugging piece that I didn't see. I was just running I'm not running the preview when I was getting ready to do this. So yeah, this is all fully client side. So we're seeing the whole thing run. And you see some of these things, I think some of these sizes are going to be a little bigger. Let me see if I can get these things open. Oh, and see, these things came out of memory. Well, those are not as big as that's not what I necessarily expected to see. But I guess it's.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so now we can see some more things here. So anyway, with both of these options, I think it gives us some really interesting choices. And I'm glad Microsoft has opted to not kind of force anybody to go one way or the other, but it's giving us some really super nice tools to be able to do this. So are you seeing some use cases where you would kind of maybe recommend looking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest use case for us is really from the developers saying, hey, I'm really comfortable in C# and I'm going to continue to do that. What's been most interesting is, I've talked to some of the folks at Microsoft just recently in dialogue, and they just said the adoption rate of Blazor is incredibly high. And I always thought that was one of the big risks, because you're committing to this platform, and what happens if it doesn't go? It has happened. There's been these platforms that haven't lasted, but just the adoption rates on this is super high from Microsoft, and not from the developer community.
Right, which is saying a lot, because I think there's some risk involved there, and if people are jumping on really, really significantly.
It essentially allows you to write, in a fully compiled language. It's going to go ahead and check your compilation, give you full type compatibility, and then do it in the browser. Still do browser development. It just makes it easier for developers to go ahead and migrate into that platform. So.
Right.
Okay.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
I'll move you on to the next slide. I can advance slides now. You're talking. What is Click Once anyway?
So just a quick comment about the deployment of these applications. So we've had Click Once for a while, but it wasn't part of .NET Core. It wasn't even thought of in the context of .NET Core. But now we can actually go ahead and take an application that you went ahead and ported to .NET 5, and you can go ahead and publish it using Click Once.
So what kind of applications would these be?
This would be like a WinForms app or a WPF. It's a rich client, what we call rich client or full client, if you like applications. It also works for console applications. The ability to go ahead and deploy these and have sort of an install that goes ahead and installs them. But the most important problem with rich client applications is updating it. How do you get a new version of the application? And the key thing about support for Click Once is the fact that now it works in a web experience for a rich client application in terms of updating the client. Instead of having to go around and visit all the machines and reinstall the app, you can go ahead and click on the same.
Oh, so just like the web.
Yeah.
If I try to run the app, so what is? So
it's still limited what platforms, right? It's still going to run on Windows,
right?
But you can go ahead and launch the app or install the application just by clicking on it.
So if I have something on the desktop, I can click on it, it installs. So then what happens when there's an update? Do I have to go down to say?
Right, it just updates itself.
Oh, so when I start it, it checks automatically. So all the hooks are built in to go back to the server wherever its home is.
So you can do updates the same way as you did before. Cool. Basically, update your file share. You'll notice there it says some web, so you can do it over HTTP, FTP, or just a network path, and it'll go ahead and update deployment every single time. We have a customer right now that's got a big WinForms app, and they've done a whole bunch of complicated stuff to try to get the update to work, and Click Once essentially solves that problem for them. It's not a thing new. We've had Click Once now for more than 10 years, I'm sure. But now the fact that we can do it
.NET 5,
yeah,
that's cool.
That's the key thing. So. Oops, I didn't do that. Sorry, I'm missing it. So there is a publish step. We'll go into the publish thing here. Is Visual Studio?
I think I closed them all down, so you have to get going again.
So I'll go ahead and create a new project here, which is C# application. Let's do a console app just for fun.
Because that's what you'd want to do. I mean, you'd want to have a console app on your desktop. You'd want to be able to deploy and fire that thing up.
I'm just biased.
Yeah, I know they're great. I mean, you don't ever need more than black and white.
It's true. The UI is so simple. People have all these complex UIs.
I heard you're writing that new UI that it's all text UI.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way to go. I don't understand why people need more of this. It doesn't make
One
it's
line
way faster. I don't even need the mouse.
I know before this, you couldn't even get you to open Visual Studio. So it's everything on the command line. So
Yeah, what I should have done is actually create this project with my command line. That's what I should have done. Anyway.
I couldn't believe you didn't.
Yeah, it was failure on my part for sure. So here you can go to publish.
You show tree shaking.
Yeah,
and all that stuff while we're in here too.
So here you get a click once option to go ahead and launch, deploy your app by click once, and I'll go ahead and create a directory for you to go ahead and do that. I'll put it in here. Is that really a directory?
Yeah, it's relative to wherever you are. It's a little bit weird because you can copy the file name, the path, and it only gives you the last part.
We're just going to go ahead and put it onto the hard drive here. So.
Yeah, we don't have any update location set up, but this is where you go and configure all that, I guess, like if you had your update servers and things like that.
So we just configured the deployment, and then we can go ahead and actually do the deployment, and essentially allows us to go copy it and do the update.
That's it. Nice.
I'm not used to putting things in my directory here. This is.
Yeah, the location, I haven't set mine either, so I can get it in the place that I usually like it to go.
So there, this says a launcher. That's what you're going to go ahead and execute, and that's going to keep.
So there's all the wrappers to make sure it's up to date.
To keep something.
It's cool.
And to install it for the first time, you can go ahead and reset. What I did want to show you, we actually have a slide for this. So next, yeah. What's more important in here that's really interesting is in the same published location, I can go. It's going to run this for me. Oh boy, it's put my publish.
Is there a new option? Yeah, hit that new, I think, that'll do it.
Thank you.
We'll be through it.
So here we can go ahead and do new, we can click folder. In this case, instead of clicking click once, we can do folder. Click new, we're going to do it in that location, finish. So now we're actually doing a folder.
What's interesting, this is a 3, we may have to upgrade. Yeah, I think by default we're still getting 3. So we may want to check that.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
You're gonna need to do it again.
It's just going to end up in a Netcore 3.1 folder, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, so what I can do is edit here, and you'll notice target framework is specified. You can drop down. You can actually change this to .NET 5. That's the option. But what I really did want to show you is that this here, you can change it from framework dependent, which means you have to install the framework beforehand, to self-contained, which means I now have to be specific to the platform to get the right runtime, and I can choose the runtime that I want to build for. I'm on a Windows box, but I can go ahead and build for other operating systems, so I can go ahead and build.
So that's a pretty decent list.
Linux here. I can change the file publish options, and you'll notice that there's the option now to produce a single file and trim on user assembly. So this is a very simple console app. It doesn't really need much, and I can go ahead and save that, and then choose to publish. And essentially, I'm going to get what I'd like to say is one executable, and that's one executable with my code. There is some other stuff associated with it, so let's get this running.
You can all restore the new stuff.
It takes quite a while to build this, in my experience.
Yeah, because you're building instead of just having one little file, you're now having to. It kind of harkens me back to the old days of the linker, right? When you could link all your DLLs together and create that single executable.
How do you debug?
You should be able to go into console.
Oh, I did it for Linux. So now I can go ahead and run it. So what we should do.
Oh, so Linux, that's one file.
Yeah. So what we could do is do ESL. Let's see if this works. I haven't tried this.
Yeah, I haven't either.
Oh, why didn't that work? ESL. There we are.
Should be able to CD into that folder, I guess. Oh, it'll be different. It's going to be in a different spot.
I don't think my path is going to work. Let me show you.
Yeah, it's going to be somewhere else. Because you're in system 32 right now. Hey, that was impressive.
No, it didn't work.
Oh, it didn't work. It's not impressive. Very unimpressive, in fact.
What is?
Oh, there's a trailing slash.
CD tilde should get you the local directory.
I think this trailing slash is going to be a problem. There you go.
Okay. I still got to get to the directory. So it's /mnt/c/users.
And now that should take you.
Still not working.
Can you just go to /mnt? Is that?
We got it. So there's
the file. Yeah.
We basically got PDB because we did debug.
Right.
And we got a single executable to
20
go ahead and
megs.
run that.
Boom. 20 megs to say hello world.
If we go ahead and do
Get rid
this
of
slightly for a different platform, I'm going to go ahead and change this from Linux to Windows x86.
Do you know if they're planning any support for the new M1 chips on that?
Do not know that, but I would assume that they.
I would assume they're going. That would be a thing that they'd want to do. And it's interesting because I think that will actually bring together the unification of the iOS platform as well, because that runs it's the same chip. So
Why is it not running the CD arc?
what's at your root? You can just do a CD slash, and then you have an MNT directory or anything you can see.
Does PWD not have command in bash?
Well, yeah, something's wrong because you should have something at.
This is working before.
Oh, do a CD /. Now do an OS.
Oh,
so now you're talking. You can. I love the coloring you got going there.
That's terrible.
So your MNT and.
Oh, now we're talking.
Cool. If you do an OS, is your
CD /.
So that's going to put you in user folder, which I don't think there's anything in there.
But that's where my file was.
Yeah, but I think this is on the Linux side, and you may not have anything in there for the Linux side. So I think if you do a CD-, you'll go back one folder, back to that. Now you're in the MNT directory, so now do there. Now I think you're cooking.
Where's the rest of that thing?
And it's in your base buffer somewhere. Now we should be able to, I think they put it in bin, and then I think it's in release. Or is it published? Maybe it's published. We've published this a few times, so it's
release.
And 5. There's the Linux x64.
It was the 3.1.
Oh, because we didn't change the name. So there we go. That's lots of fun. Publish.
Concept 1.
We have to make that here. /.
There we go.
22 megs of hello world, which, when you think about it, for the whole .NET for the .NET piece of .NET framework we need, relatively big thing, several hundred megs. Shake that thing down, and obviously we're getting way more than we probably need in this case.
Right. Just to be clear, because we did the publish twice. Whoops. Sorry. Yeah. You'll notice there's a bunch of other stuff in here. So that's because we now changed it to Windows.
Yeah, we should have dropped it into.
So I'll put it in a different folder. So I think what I'll do is change this back to Linux x64.
And change
And
that.
I'll put this in the Linux directory. Save. Let's go ahead and publish that. And I think what you'll see is for the Linux, it's actually smaller. So Windows gives you these additional things in there. CD dot dot CD dot dot.
I think we're in. I think we're good right there.
CD. Where?
I think publish and then Linux.
CD.
So there's your Linux folder. Yeah, great. That's a good.
So you'll notice under Linux, we're just getting the two applications, the console app 1 and the console PDB, because we did it in debug.
We should probably make this a little bit bigger. Do a wheel on that. And I think you can do control wheel and then. Oh. There we go. Sorry, people probably can't read that very well. Maybe that's better.
So in the Linux case, in the Windows case, it wasn't as good. Oh, sorry.
I do it on. So it was pretty fast. Yeah,
it's a console app with no code.
Well, but still, I mean, it's a fairly big file. It's not.
Yeah.
You're not just doing nothing.
Yeah,
so it was a decent experience.
But the interesting point to note is that at least right now, this is not the long-term plan. I think we can see it get better. But at least right now, in the Windows case, we are getting the exe for the single app, but we're also getting some associated files that go along with it as well.
And it seems to not run with those. You can't really take
them
away.
Yeah, if you delete those, it won't run. So the Windows case actually requires a few more files if you're not installed the framework. If you haven't installed, the version of .NET Core that you compiled against.
Right.
But it's pretty cool now that I basically can distribute, a single app, and it just works across all platforms.
So what do you see as some use cases?
It works without installing the framework before.
Some use cases for this particular having a single file.
Well, I mean, essentially, this means you can distribute a tool without having any dependencies, right?
Right.
So your
and
whole
really
app,
not even an install.
Right. There's no install. Copy it in. Xcopy deploy, it gets to work, and we've had Xcopy for a long time, but you had to install the framework.
Right.
Now we've got Xcopy deploy without even installing the framework. And you'll notice that tag that I put in there when we did the edit. With this, it does actually do tree trimming, so it figures out what you're actually using. So
if you don't do that, you think it would get, because what do we have, a 22 meg file or something when we did Linux? I guess this is the Windows side. We can go look at what the Windows one is. Or this is Linux.
This is Linux.
Oh yeah, I guess you just do that. So no tree shaking. What do we get? And then in the Linux folder. So we went from 61 to 22, so about a third of the size.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Keep going.
I think we're almost done. That's it, actually. We reached the end.
That's it. Overall, I would say that at this point, if you're starting new, I can't come up with a reason why you wouldn't start with .NET 5. I just, for a new project, that's clearly the case.
And I would say, even if you're really familiar with a piece of old technology like Windows Forms or something like that, I would still encourage you to go forward and look at some of these other technologies, because there are, when you look at the sheer number of ways that you can write user experiences, because that's really kind of what it comes down to, and even web experiences or even web API backends, there's a lot of options now. And I think finding one that is in that .NET 5, 6, 7, 8 pathway is probably a really good choice for you at this point.
Yeah, if you go back and look at the support profiles, so you continue to look at those dates of when things are going to be supported. I think you really need to target. I think .NET 3 at this point was saying, hey, it's time for you to think about migrating. Yeah. But given the fact that we're starting to see 4.8 going out of support, it's time for us to think of .NET Core. But the migration from .NET Core, from .NET Framework into .NET Core has become so much easier that it's going to become more and more critical that you start to make the migration. But you don't have to go ahead and delete all your code. The key things that are going to hold you up is if you're referencing assemblies that haven't got .NET standard support. Like, so those are the key things they're going to say. I'm just not ready to do this. So from my perspective, I think it does need to be planned. It's not something you should do. When you get up in the morning and decide to go to production that day, you're going to have this. You're going to have to You're likely to encounter some problems and testing that's required, but you don't want to have this go on forever in such a way that you stay stuck in a .NET framework that's no longer supported long term. That's it.
Aaron, do we have any questions?
We don't right now, but if you ask them, maybe they'll put them in the
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
Toss them out in the chat. We'll be happy to make up answers for questions that you have.
Okay, looks like we have. We'll stick around.
Yeah.
If you do have anything, we can stick around for a bit. And other than that, thank you everyone for joining us. We did hear a request to actually do a Blazor presentation, and we've got some experts on our team to go ahead and handle that. And next week we're going to be doing Angular. Sean, I think, is going to be doing Angular. We haven't got topics yet. We need to filter that down, but
we are looking that direction. If anyone has a topic they'd like
Aaron.
to discuss on Angular.
Oh, come on.
Oh, what? Oh, you want? Oh, the video. You want me? Are we playing musical chairs now? Musical chairs. Okay. If anyone wants to know something specific about Angular, please put it in the chat box so that we can talk to Sean about that. Also, I threw in the chat box the links to next week's DevOps meetup and next month's meetup for us, whether it's Angular or Blazor or whatever we end up going with. So I'm going to go double check. Looks like
I'll take the questions.
Bill says next week or next month. So DevOps is next week and the .NET is next month.
Yeah.
So.
And the next week we're going to have Steve do the presentation
For DevOps.
For DevOps, and he's been doing some really good, cool things with DCM and getting that deployed using PowerShell. So I think
What's
that's
DCM?
Platforming, getting your platform up and running, sort of getting your environment configured. So I highly encourage you to do that. He's got a bunch of automation about that. That's really cool. Wayne asked a question about WCF support. We intentionally didn't put this in.
I'm gonna let you guys handle that then.
I'll go. We'll do musical chairs again.
I'm not gonna get in here. Where's Brian Jones when we need him?
So yeah, it turns out that .NET 5 does have support for WCF. We intentionally didn't do it. We just didn't think that there was that many people. But I can say from personal experience that there was a lot of investment in WCF, and that is something that's supported in .NET 5 as well now.
Steve would like to clarify it's DCS, not DCM.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. So related to that, to WCF, there is WCF support. I can't actually comment on using it. At this point, the GPR, I'm getting my acronyms wrong.
The Europe thing?
Yeah, no.
Oh, I'm saying it wrong. DSC. Sorry.
No, protocol for communication.
I feel like we're playing a game here.
Okay, whatever. I can't think of it. My mind's blank at this point.
Sounds like a squirrel.
So I think what we've seen is that unless you've got existing WCF, obviously you're going to be writing from scratch, but there is support for WCF in .NET 5. So thanks for mentioning that, Wayne.
So one other thing, what doesn't come? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that has migrated from the 4.7 framework. And what I'm looking at, so WebForms, is that they're not planning to move that forward. I mean,
but we get to have that syntax, cool.
Right, yeah, you get the razor page, and I think honestly what they're making, I mean, so the path to migrate is going to be hard. If you have a big web forms thing, there's going to be some pain involved there because there's a UI drag and drop, but there's some things there, and so that's going to be a bit of a muscle movement. And I think some of the razor stuff may be a really good choice. As you're looking at those things, you're into a rewrite, and that's I don't see a way around that. I don't know if they could have done that. And the other one is the Windows workflow. You need the workflow foundation stuff that it just isn't going to be supporting.
So now we mentioned so it came with .NET Framework 3.0. We got Windows workflow, we got WCF and Windows Forms, and it turns out that WCF continues in .NET 5. And WFF continues for Windows workflows.
Yeah, right.
You've got a couple questions about gRPC.
Thank you, Stokes. No,
Actually, not Stokes.
Is that what you want?
Well, Stokes said GPRC as well.
Oh, I have recent.
Thank you, all of you. That's exactly the acronym I was trying to think of. Essentially, if you are writing apps today, you're going to be using JSON or you're going to be using gRPC, and that's why you're not going to be writing new stuff today, because you get pretty high performance out of the to your PC. So thank you, Wayne, for doing that, mentioning that. You were first, and then Reese and Stokes, you.
Yeah, we should give a prize or something.
Yeah, we should do that. I think
We should, like the first person to correct us. It would be like 30 seconds into the presentation.
Yeah, I do appreciate the help, genuinely. So, okay, I think that's all. Thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it, and we would look to doing something like Angular next week. That'd be great.
Great.
Next month.
Next month.
I keep saying
Yep,
that.
and join next week for the DevOps talk. I think
That's right. Yeah, so I can highly recommend Steve as a presenter, but also the level of depth he went into to understanding that deployment is just impressive. Yeah. So I highly recommend that as a session you guys want to participate in. So other than that, thanks very much. We appreciate it. Come join us for DSC next week. Yep.
And thanks for hosting.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great evening.
Cheers.